My name is Jack McCauley. I retired May 2013. I was the commander of the Maryland State Police Licensing Division. I spent 24 years of my life as a Maryland State Trooper. I spent a lot of time in criminal investigations. I've been assigned to the Eastern Shore for a long time, where I was a detective. Was one of the original 10 members of the Maryland State Police Homicide Unit, where I worked for quite a period of time. Successfully solved the first cold case homicide with the state police. Ran that division. I worked my way up and was promoted. I ran the Maryland State Police Gang Unit across the entire state. I ran the Firearms Enforcement Unit. We were in charge, responsibility of supposed to be tracking down violent criminals involved in gun crime. Baltimore City, PG County, Gun Task Force with the ATF. In March of 2012, I was assigned to the Maryland State Police Licensing Division as the commander. I decided what good and substantial was. That was my job. I want to tell you, I haven't always felt the way I do right now. I was assigned there because the state of Maryland lost a lawsuit against good and substantial, where they said it didn't fit a good definition. It just wasn't reasonable. And so we were going to start issuing handgun permits. And I got to be honest with you, I was a little bit scared. Not so much afraid of people having handgun permits, but I was afraid of how would my people process that, a division who'd been ignored for so long with so few people. How would we do that? How many people would come out? And these crazy people, these Second Amendment activists, they're all going to want these. They're trophies. They're all going to want this permit. It's going to be scary. Dangerous people are going to be getting guns. Just any Joe citizen's going to get a gun. And so I started researching a little bit. I started meeting with some of these people from Maryland Shall Issue. What a crazy organization that is. I started meeting with AGC Gun Club. I was warned, don't talk to that guy, he's crazy. But you know what? When I met them, they schooled me. They not only schooled, they embarrassed me. They humbled me. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. I'd fought my life. I put my life on the line every day for the state of Maryland and the citizens of the state of Maryland. I worried about people carrying guns. I really did. I thought there would be blood in the street. So I devoted myself to studying that. And if you've been around me, you know that I'm pretty obsessive about everything that I do. So when I say I studied it, I mean I slept 2 hours a night studying it. I called everybody I could, every resource, talked to every person I could, and I found out some staggering information about handgun permits and what was going on. My fears weren't justified. MSI, they're a great organization with a lot of good people. I once fielded a complaint that I was a member of Maryland Shall Issue. Well, today I am a proud member of Maryland Shall Issue, but then I was not. I don't speak on their behalf today. I speak as a former representative of the licensing division and a former state trooper. But I want to tell you, there are over 11 million licensed handgun permit holders in the United States. A 10-year study was done from 1987 to, and on that studied over 2.5 million carriers. Of those, 168 people had their permit revoked for an offense involving a firearm. And more often than not, it was for accidentally carrying that firearm into a non-gun zone or a gun-free zone. Staggering. That's 0.006% of 2.5 million licensed firearm carriers over a 10-year period. What's more staggering than that is that the same study was done on law enforcement, and they were more likely than the handgun concealed weapon holders to be arrested for a crime involving a firearm. Slightly more, 0.007%. So I think about that, and I researched that. I looked at that. I wanted to read that study, and originally I wanted to prove it wrong. But I read that, and I tried to, and I couldn't. It was very accurate where they obtain their information. Law enforcement's more dangerous than concealed weapon carriers. The guys that I've met, the guys that I've been educated with, the guys that I've learned a lot from, AGC, the crazy guy, who is now one of the greatest guys I've ever met in my life. He knows these gun laws inside and out, and he knows the problems with it. He drew my attention as the commander of the licensing division to problems I didn't know existed. And I was well on my way to working out some of those issues, but I'm going to tell you, it's a bureaucratic nightmare. It really was. Because I didn't know, to be quite honest with you, some of the problems existed. But I just want to talk to you about good and substantial. When your permit application comes in, what is good and substantial? It's a reasonable precaution against an apprehended danger. Can anyone even define that? I literally would go downstairs because I had complaints day after day, over 300 emails a day that I would respond to. Many of them, as the commander of that division, were over the argument of what is good and substantial. Can you define, does this match? No. Does this match? No. Well, what does? So I would talk to my guys in that division, and we would argue. They would be arguing amongst themselves over applications. They're literally in the break room trying to decide whether someone met the definition of good and substantial. And sometimes they would lose the argument, or sometimes they would win the argument. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen, and I'm like, why don't you have a set policy for this? And I tried to set policy, but they couldn't, because they hung their hat on a court decision called Scher. And Scher decided that not only do you need a reasonable precaution against apprehended danger, it must be more than your personal anxiety. In other words, it must be more than what other people feel, or you must have a danger more than other people. So I asked that same police officer, that trooper who was issuing the permits, he was deciding on it daily. I said, would you take your family to a baseball game in Baltimore City without your sidearm on? He said, absolutely not. I said, why not? He said, because you know why. I'm afraid. There's crime rate in Baltimore's high. I'm a police officer. I'm not going there. I said, but they don't know you're a police officer in Baltimore, do they? He said, no. You live in Baltimore? No. So your reasonable precaution against an apprehended danger is not because you're law enforcement. It's because you're in a high crime area, and you wouldn't dare go in there without protecting your family. He said, the legislators won't define it, so we have to. And that's just what they've done. The arbitrary administration of this process, it's horrible. It's an absolute nightmare, and it needs to have something done about it. Self-defense is very simple. As a senator, I'd be very concerned to go back and tell my constituents who are afraid of guns, who think gun violence is just destroying this, and say, I voted for a bill. I get that. I understand your fears. Trust me. Again, I once felt like that before I realized I was wrong. But what can you do? Well, I have reached out to so many lawmakers, and quite frankly, I've had very little response. I didn't just run the licensing division. I fought gang members across this state. I ran a gun unit. I know what violent crime is. I know the problem. I trained police officers across the state. I train them. I know where their mistakes are. Do you know the average age of a police officer on the streets in Maryland? Or the average experience, rather? It's 18 months. Think about in 18 months what you knew. What you knew in 18 months. Not a lot. There was just some bad police work going on. And I am telling you, I can give you 10 top reasons how we can reduce gun crime in Maryland. I've reached out to the Moms Demand Action. They haven't responded to me.
Mr.
I've had conversation. I've reached out with plenty of groups. Yes, sir.
If you could, you have some questions, and I've given you some extra time just
Yes,
because
sir.
I know you're an expert on these issues. So, but if you
did.
could wrap up, and then I know you've got Senator Norman and Senator Reedy have questions for you.
Just to wrap up real quick.
Thank you so much.
What I believe in Maryland is that the way that we fight gun crime is out of focus completely. There are so many different scenarios and ideas and concepts for fighting gun crime. I'm willing to share them. I need someone to listen to those. We need a committee on that. But let me say this. These guys, who I once feared the same as you, carrying handgun permits isn't it. Statistics show that. They do. They're not a danger. They're vetted. The background check is done. They're required to qualify. This is not a danger or a threat to our society.